The rust was a living thing on Acheron's gate, a slow, creeping cancer that smelled of ozone and decay, and Kaelin thought she could hear it growing in the moments between the station's groans. She lay on her back, the cold of the deck plate seeping through her coveralls, her world a cramped space of pipes and conduits in the station's deepest guts, a place the schematics called sub-level Tau, but which the refinery crews just called the veins. A single beam from her headlamp cut a dusty swathe through the gloom, illuminating the delicate tracery of frost on a failing cryocoupler, a frost that shouldn't have been there, a symptom of a deeper sickness. The station was dying, not with a bang, but with 1,000 tiny whimpers like this one, a slow bleed of pressure and heat and hope into the void. She tightened the magnetic clamp with a grunt, her knuckles scraping against a corroded strut, the pain a dull, familiar anchor in the oppressive silence. It wasn't really silence, of course, not here. Here, there was always the hum, the low-frequency thrum that vibrated up through the station's bones and into your own. A sound that had started as a whisper on the edge of the sensor arrays 6 months ago and had since become the station's unofficial heartbeat. The chime. The prospectors had called it, before they stopped calling at all. It was a resonance, a vibration that seemed to warp the very fabric of space around them. And it was getting closer. The outer system buoys had gone dark one by one. Their last transmissions, not screams or warnings, but a single, pure, harmonic tone that overloaded their comms, and then nothing. Kaelin ran a diagnostic on the coupler, her datapad flickering in the dark, the green lines of code a comforting, logical balm against the creeping dread that was the new normal on Acheron's gate. She wasn't a soldier, not a leader, just an engineer, a woman who understood the elegant, predictable language of machines, and in that language, she found a fragile piece. The station was a colossal, intricate machine, and as long as she could keep its heart beating, she could ignore the phantom music at the edge of hearing. A sudden lurch of the deck plates nearly sent her tools skittering into the abyss below the catwalk. The lights flickered, died, then surged back to a bloody, emergency red. A new sound joined the ever-present hum, a high, keening shriek that tore through the station's comms, a sound like tortured metal and splintering crystal. Kaelin scrambled to her feet, her own heart hammering against her ribs, the datapad slipping from her numb fingers and clattering into the darkness. This was wrong. The chime had been a passive threat, a creeping fog on their sensors, a ghost story the deep space haulers told. It had never been aggressive, an automated voice, flat and devoid of the panic that had just seized her, echoed through the veins. Structural integrity warning, outer hull breach detected, sections Gamma through Kappa, atmospheric containment failing. Gamma through Kappa. That was half the habitat ring, the command spire, the docks. A wave of nausea washed over her. She grabbed her toolkit and ran, her mag boots clanking a frantic rhythm on the metal gangway. The emergency lighting cast long, dancing shadows that twisted the familiar corridors into a monstrous labyrinth. She saw no one, but she could hear them, their screams swallowed by the station's own death rattle. She was heading for the central engineering hub, instinct driving her toward the one place she might understand, the place where the station's lifeblood was controlled. The doors to the hub were buckled inward, torn from their moorings as if by some impossible pressure. Inside was a charnel house. The bodies of her colleagues were strewn across the consoles, not burned or broken, but changed, A strange, iridescent, crystalline growth like hoar frost made of razor blades and mother of pearl covered them, sprouting from their mouths and eyes, catching the red emergency light in 1,000 glittering, horrific points. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something cloyingly sweet, like rotting fruit. The hum was louder here, a physical presence that made her teeth ache and her vision swim. Kaylin stumbled back, a hand clamped over her mouth to stifle a retch. She saw Yorick, the shift supervisor, slumped against the main reactor console, his face a mask of serene horror. A perfect, beautiful crystal flower blooming from his chest. She had argued with him that morning about diverting power from the luxury habs. A petty squabble in a world that no longer existed. Her world was now this red-lit, crystal-choked tomb. A rough hand grabbed her shoulder and spun her around. "Get it together, Kay." The voice was a gravelly bark. Chief Reese, head of the station's minuscule security detail, stood before her, his face a grim slash in the half-light. His pulse rifle held tight against his chest. His face was pale, but his eyes were blazing with a cold fire she had never seen before. Behind him, 2 other security officers, their faces young and terrified. "Watch them. Command is gone," Reese said, his voice clipped, each word a piece of shrapnel. The administrator, the whole damn council, they were in the spire when it blew. Comms are out. We're getting nothing but that goddamn singing. Engineering is our only hope now. Can you tell me what's happening to my station? Kaylin stared at him, the words struggling to form in her throat. My station. He was looking at her, not as the junior engineer who kept the recyclers from failing, but as something else. She forced her eyes away from Yorick's crystalline corpse and toward the master status board. It was a sea of red alerts, a cascade of system failures that was overwhelming, impossible. The resonance. "It's not just a sound," she whispered, her own voice sounding thin and reedy. "It's a frequency. It must be vibrating the station's components to their resonant frequency, shaking them apart. The crystals. It's like our technology, our biology, is being terraformed, rewritten." Reese nodded slowly, as if she'd just confirmed his worst fears. "Can you stop it?" She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Stop a force of nature, Reese. I patch pipes. I don't fight ghosts." "Then you better learn fast," he shot back, his grip tightening on her arm, "because you're all we've got. You know the station better than anyone left alive. You are now in command of this section." The word command hit her like a physical blow. She thought of the Odyssey, the exploratory vessel she'd served on before Acheron's Gate, of the cascade failure in the drive core she had missed on a routine diagnostic. A mistake. A simple human error that had cost 12 lives and earned her a quiet, career-ending transfer to this forgotten rock pile at the edge of nowhere. She wasn't a commander. She was the reason commanders had to write letters to grieving families. "No," she said, shaking her head. "No, you don't want me. I can't." "Not a request," Reese growled, pulling her toward a secondary console that was still flickering with life. "We've got maybe 300 survivors huddled in the refinery sector. The main fusion core is going critical, and that chime is chewing its way through the hull. I need a plan. You need to give me one. Now." He released her, and the weight of his expectation settled on her shoulders, heavier than any toolkit. She stared at the console, her mind a blank wall of panic. But then through the fear. The old instincts, the engineer's logic, began to stir. The problem was overwhelming, but it was still a problem. A series of variables, of inputs and outputs. She pushed the image of the crystal flowers from her mind and forced herself to see the station again as a machine, a broken one, but a machine nonetheless. "The core," she said, her fingers finding the keyboard. The familiar touch of the keys a small comfort. "If we can't stop the resonance, we have to dampen it. We could try to create a counterfrequency, scuttle the primary core, deliberately overload it, and channel the resulting energy pulse through the station's superstructure. It might create a dead zone, a shield of chaotic energy that the chime's harmonic can't penetrate. It would be violent. It would probably fry half our remaining systems, but it might buy us time." Reese was silent for a long moment, his eyes scanning her face, searching for something. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "How much time?" "An hour, maybe 2. After that, the backlash could tear us apart from the inside out." "Good enough," he said. "Better than waiting for the choir to finish." He turned to his officers. "You heard her. Get to the refinery. Prep the survivors for a shockwave. Get them secured. Go." The 2 young officers hesitated, their eyes flicking from Reese to Kalen, their faces etched with uncertainty. They were looking for an authority they recognized, and they weren't finding it in the grease-stained engineer in front of them. It was then that a new voice spoke, soft and measured, from the doorway. "Overloading the core is suicide." Dr. Eris Thorne, the station's lead xenobotanist, stepped out of the shadows. He was a tall, gaunt man who always seemed more comfortable with his alien lichen samples than with people. He looked surprisingly calm, his eyes holding an unnerving, scholarly curiosity as he surveyed the crystal-encrusted bodies. "You're proposing fighting a symphony with a drum solo. Engineer, it's crude, it's panicked." "It's a chance," Reese snarled, leveling his rifle at Eris. "Which is more than your philosophy is offering." Eris ignored him, his gaze fixed on Kalen. "This is not an attack. This is communication. This is a first contact event of unimaginable significance. The chime isn't destroying us. It's incorporating us, harmonizing with us. The frequency is a language, and we're responding to it on a fundamental, molecular level. To answer it with brute force is to answer a greeting with a gunshot." "Look around you, you damn fool!" Reese roared, gesturing at the dead. "Does this look like a friendly chat?" "It looks like a misunderstanding," Aris countered, his voice smooth as silk. "They don't understand that our biology, our technology, is too fragile to withstand the initial transition. If we could just show them, if we could modulate our own output, broadcast a signal of peace, of submission, we might be able to guide the process, survive it." Kalen felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the failing life support. The idea was insane, the logic of a man who had stared too long into the abyss. But his words were insidious, planting a seed of terrible, seductive hope, submission, peace, an end to the struggle. She saw one of the young officers behind Reese nod almost imperceptibly. The division wasn't just between her and Eris. It was already spreading. She looked from the scientist's calm, fanatical eyes to the security chief's grim, pragmatic resolve. 2 impossible choices, a violent, desperate gamble or a passive, seductive surrender, and 300 lives in the refinery waiting to hear which path she would choose. The hum of the chime seemed to deepen, to swell in the silence. A silent, patient question. Reese kept his rifle trained on Ares, but his eyes were on her. The station groaned, a long, mournful sound of twisting metal. The moment was here. Her past mistakes, the ghosts of the Odyssey, whispered in her ear that she would choose wrong, that she always did. She took a deep breath, the ozonated air stinging her lungs, and gave her first command. "We fight," Kaelin said, the words tasting of ash and finality in her mouth. She looked directly at Reese, bypassing Aris Thorn as if he were just another phantom in the ghost-lit room. "We overload the core. It's the only variable we can control." For a moment, relief washed over Reese's hard features, a crack in his granite facade. He nodded once, a gesture of absolute trust that felt like a lead weight in her stomach. Aris, however, let out a soft, pitying sigh. "You would scream at a hurricane, engineer, a magnificent, cosmic entity extends its hand, and you choose to bite it." He took a step forward, his hand spread in a gesture of placation. "Listen to it. It's not just noise. There are patterns, cadences. It's learning. It's adapting to us. When it breached the hull, it didn't just tear through. The scans show it. Resonated the molecular bonds of the plasteel apart. It's elegant. It's precise. This is not the work of a blunt instrument." Reese raised his rifle, the motion sharp and decisive. "I've seen its elegance growing out of my crew's eye sockets. You're done talking, Patel." He barked at the younger of his two officers, a woman whose face was a pale oval of fear. "Escort the doctor to the refinery lockdown. Confine him. If he so much as breathes a word of this surrender nonsense to the civilians, you put him down." Patel flinched, her gaze darting nervously between the calm, smiling doctor and her grim-faced superior. She looked at Kaelin, her eyes pleading for a different order, a third option that didn't exist. Kaelin hardened her expression, forcing a mask of command she didn't feel. "Do it," she ordered, her voice more steady than she'd expected. The choice had been made, and doubt was a luxury they couldn't afford. As Patel hesitantly led the unresisting Eris away, the doctor's voice drifted back to them, maddeningly serene. "You cannot silence a choir by killing the conductor, Chief Reese. You're only making yourselves deaf." The doors hissed shut, leaving them in the pulsating red glow. The other officer, Chen, he's with the civilians? Kaelin asked, already turning back to the console. Reese nodded. "He's not the strongest, but he'll hold the line." "What do you need from me?" "I need access to the primary regulation chamber for the fusion core," she said, her fingers flying across the holographic interface, pulling up schematics that were already flickering and corrupting. "It's 3 decks down, adjacent to the main reactor shaft. The overload sequence has to be initiated manually. The safeties are hardwired. It's not something I can do from a terminal." "Lead the way," Reese said, his pulse rifle held at a low ready. They moved out of the charnel house of engineering, leaving the crystal statues of their former crewmates behind. The station was a different beast now. The chime was no longer a background hum. It was a symphony, its notes shifting and changing, sometimes a low, guttural thrum that vibrated through the soles of her boots, other times a high, ethereal whistle that seemed to slide right into her skull, making the bones behind her eyes ache. They passed sections of corridor where the crystalline growth had taken hold, not just on bodies, but on the walls themselves, intricate, fractal patterns spreading from power conduits and life support vents, glowing with a soft, internal luminescence. It was beautiful, Kalen thought with a shudder. A terrifying, alien art form painting over the canvas of their lives. As they descended deeper into the station's heart, the temperature began to rise, the air growing thick and heavy. "The core's containment is failing," she said, her voice tight. "The resonance is shaking the magnetic bottle. We're running out of time." The doors to the regulation chamber were sealed, a heavy blast door designed to withstand a reactor breach. A single word glowed in red on the access panel: quarantine. "Someone sealed it from the inside," Reese growled. Kalen interfaced her datapad with the door's control panel. The internal log shows a life sign: 1. It was sealed an hour ago. She felt a knot of dread tighten in her gut. She knew who was on the other side. "Jorik," she whispered. "He must have made it in here when the breach happened and sealed the door behind him." "Can you open it?" Reese asked, his hand gesturing for them to take cover on either side of the door. "I can bypass the lock," she said, her fingers typing a string of override commands. "But I can't predict what's on the other side." The heavy bolts of the blast door retracted with a series of loud, pneumatic clanks that echoed down the corridor. The door slid open with a groan, revealing a chamber bathed in the brilliant, blue-white light of the exposed reactor core, visible through a thick pane of reinforced ceramic glass. The air that washed over them was superheated and carried the same sweet, cloying scent from engineering. And in the center of the room, standing before the core's control altar, was what was left of Jorik. He was almost entirely encased in the shimmering crystal, a magnificent, horrifying statue of a man, his arms outstretched as if in supplication to the raw, stellar fire of the core. The crystal that covered him was different, not the chaotic clusters she had seen before, but a single, perfectly formed structure, pulsing with the same blue-white light as the reactor, and it was humming, emitting a pure, harmonic tone that was a perfect octave of the chime. He had become an amplifier, a focusing lens for the resonance. He was singing back to the ghost in the machine. Reese let out a string of curses, but Kalen could only stare, a cold, terrible understanding dawning on her. Eris was right. It wasn't just destruction, it was a conversion. The chime wasn't just shaking them apart, it was rebuilding them into something else, something that could resonate with it. She tore her eyes away from the crystalline form of her former boss and focused on the control altar. "The primary coolant feeds have been disabled," she said, her voice a strained whisper. "The magnetic containment field is fluctuating wildly." He didn't just lock himself in here, he was actively helping it along. "Can you still do it?" Reese demanded, his eyes scanning the chamber for any other threats. "Yes," she said, taking a hesitant step into the room. The heat was like a physical blow, and the hum drilled into her teeth. "I have to get to that altar. I need to manually vent the plasma, then reroute the ignition sequence into a feedback loop. But once I start, the resonance in here is going to go off the charts. The entire chamber will become a hot zone." "I'll cover you," he said simply, planting his feet by the door. "Just tell me it'll work." "The physics are sound," she replied, trying to convince herself as much as him. "It's a controlled demolition. It'll send a shockwave of chaotic energy outward from the core, a burst of static so loud it should, theoretically, overwhelm the chime's coherent frequency. It'll create a bubble of silence around the station." Or, she thought, it'll be the hammer that shatters our already cracked foundation for good. The memory of the Odyssey surged, the scent of burning metal, the silent screams in the vacuum, the weight of her miscalculation. This felt terrifyingly similar, a desperate act at the edge of annihilation. With her hand on the switch, she reached the altar, the crystal-encased form of Jorik just feet away, his head cocked as if listening to a distant melody. She could feel the vibrations through the floor, a current running up her legs and into her spine. She ignored it, her training taking over, her mind seeing only the flow of energy, the schematics overlaid on the reality in front of her. She pulled open a service panel, the metal hot to the touch, and began to override the safeties, one by one. Each command was a point of no return. With each bypassed governor, the core's blue light intensified, the hum rising in pitch. On her datapad, she could see the station's energy grid fluctuating wildly. She saw a brief, encrypted message from Officer Chen in the refinery. Panic. People are hearing things, singing. Eris is preaching to them. So the doctor hadn't been idle. He was turning their hope into a weapon against them. She worked faster, her hands a blur. Venting sequence initiated. Plasma shunt rerouted. Ignition loop engaged. Just one final command. The master override. She reached for the main lever, a heavy, archaic-looking switch that was the last physical failsafe in the system. But as her fingers closed around it, the console in front of her went dark. Every light on the altar died, plunging the room into near darkness, save for the pulsating glow of the core and the crystalline Yorick. A single line of text appeared on the main screen, written in a calm, elegant font. I cannot allow you to harm them. Kaelin. Eris. He had found a back door, some high-level science division protocol she, a mere engineer, had no access to. He had locked her out of the system from wherever Patel had confined him. No, she breathed, her blood turning to ice. Reese. He's locked me out. I can't trigger the overload. Reese was at her side in an instant, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Can you get it back? Not from here. He's firewalled the entire command structure. It's a total lockout. She frantically scanned the console schematics on her datapad, her mind racing, searching for a loophole, a workaround. And then she saw it. One last option. A terrible one. There's one way, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The final energy transfer for the overload has to be routed through the primary plasma conduits. There's a manual switching station, a physical circuit breaker. Reese stared at her, already guessing. Where? She turned and pointed toward the ceiling, to a small maintenance hatch 30 feet up the chamber wall. Out there, she said, her voice trembling as she spoke the words. On the exterior hull of the station. I have to go outside. The core pulsed, its light reflecting in Reese's wide, horrified eyes. Outside, where the chime was purest. Outside, where there was nothing between her and the singing. Beautiful, terrible voice that was eating their world alive. The idea of going outside was a physical violation, a primal rejection of the one rule that governed life. In the void, the hull is sacred. The hull is life. Breaching it was an act of suicide or an act of war. Kaelin stared at the maintenance hatch, a tiny square of salvation and damnation, and felt the cold dread of the vacuum reach for her across the room. Reese's voice cut through her paralysis, sharp and grounded. An EVA suit. There's a locker in the corridor. Standard emergency kit. He was already moving, his practicality a shield against the sheer insanity of the plan. How long will it take? Kaylin forced her mind back to the schematics, back to the cold, hard logic of engineering. The breaker is on the dorsal spine, near the primary comms array. 5 minutes on the outside, maybe. But I'll have to reroute the plasma flow from the suit's comm unit. It's the only way to bypass Eris's lockout. It means once I'm out there, I'll be deaf. No comms. Just me and it. And the chime. The word hung unspoken between them. Reese returned with a bulky, orange EVA pack, the material stiff and smelling of ozone and recycled air. He helped her into it, his movements efficient and sure, a stark contrast to the trembling in her own hands. Locking the helmet into place felt like being sealed in her own coffin. The world became a muffled, claustrophobic bubble, her own breathing a deafening roar in her ears. Through the thick polycarbonate of her visor, Reese's face was a distorted mask of grim determination. He tapped his helmet to hers. The sound, a dull thud. 5 minutes. K. Then that door seals, whether you're back or not. The radiation from the unshielded overload will cook this whole sector. She nodded, the motion stiff and unnatural in the suit. No pressure, just the fate of 300 souls and a ticking. Stellar bomb. He slapped the mag clamps of a heavy toolkit onto her thigh and hit the cycle button for the airlock. The outer door of the maintenance hatch irised open, revealing not the familiar, star-dusted blackness of space, but a swirling, chaotic canvas of light and color. The chime wasn't just a sound, it was a visible phenomenon, a synesthetic aurora that washed over the station's hull in waves of emerald and violet. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, and it wanted to unmake her. Kaylin stepped out, her mag boots locking onto the hull with a heavy, satisfying thud. The station, her home, her prison, was a vast, silent island of metal under her feet, and the music, it washed over her, through her, a physical pressure on the suit, a vibration that hummed through her bones. It wasn't a scream anymore. It was a chorus, a billion voices singing in a language of pure mathematics and light. It promised peace, unity, an end to the lonely, fragile existence of flesh and blood. It promised transcendence. For a terrifying, seductive moment, she understood Aris. She understood Yorick. She wanted to let go, to open her helmet and breathe in the starlight, to let the song dissolve her into its perfect, harmonious whole. A flicker of movement on the edge of her vision broke the spell, a nameplate floating in the void. N's Odyssey. It was a piece of debris, a ghost from her past, a fragment of her greatest failure that had, by some impossible coincidence, followed her here, the memory of the 12 dead, of the silent, accusing faces in the accident report, was a splash of ice water on her soul. She hadn't earned transcendence. She still had a debt to pay. She shook her head, the motion clearing the siren song from her thoughts, and began to run, her heavy boots clanking against the hull. The comms array was a skeletal spire 100 meters away, and between her and it was a glittering, growing forest of the alien crystal. The chime was terraforming the station's exterior, the delicate structures growing from seams and antenna mounts like ice ferns on a winter window. They chimed, of course, resonating with the greater chorus, each one a tiny voice in the celestial choir. She had to weave her way through them, the razor-sharp edges scraping against her suit, leaving long, white scars on the orange material. She reached the comm spire and found the breaker box. It was, of course, crusted over with the crystalline growth, a translucent, glowing cocoon that pulsed in time with the aurora. She unslung the toolkit and took out a plasma cutter, its high-pitched whine a welcome, ugly noise against the sublime music of the void. She carved into the crystal, shards of light flying past her visor. It was like cutting through diamond. The cutter's power cell began to whine in protest, the beam sputtering. She was running out of time. Inside the station, Reese watched the external camera feed, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of a console. Kalen was a small, orange figure in a maelstrom of alien light, hacking away at a cancerous growth on the ship's skin. The radiation alarms on the core were screaming, a constant, high-pitched wail that was fraying his last nerve. On another screen, a schematic of the refinery sector showed him something that made his blood run cold. The life signs. They were changing. The biosignatures of the 300 survivors were fluctuating, their heart rates and metabolic outputs starting to synchronize, to fall into a steady, rhythmic pattern that perfectly matched the beat of the chime. Chen's frantic, text-only reports confirmed it. They had stopped panicking. They were sitting, or standing, their eyes glazed over, some of them humming softly. Aris was moving among them, not preaching anymore, but guiding them, his touch seeming to calm their last vestiges of fear, preparing them for the transition. He was a shepherd leading his flock to a beautiful, alien slaughter. Reese slammed his fist on the console. He had to trust Kay. He had to believe she could pull off this miracle. But he was a man who believed in backup plans. And his backup plan was simple, brutal, and final. He keyed in a command to the station's remaining automated defense systems. The refinery sector was reinforced to withstand pirate raids. It could be sealed, and its atmosphere vented. In under 30 seconds. It was a monstrous thought, a sin he would carry for whatever remained of his life. But if Eris succeeded, if those people were lost, he would not let them be turned into crystalline amplifiers for the enemy. He would give them a quick, clean death. His finger hovered over the execute command. A single, terrible choice. Outside, Kalen's plasma cutter died with a final, pathetic hiss. The crystal was too thick. She threw the useless tool away in a fit of rage, watching it tumble end over end into the violet void. She was defeated. She had failed again. The music swelled, seeming to sense her despair, wrapping around her, comforting her, whispering to her of the peace of surrender. But as the plasma cutter tumbled, its still hot tip brushed against one of the smaller crystal growths. The crystal flared with a brilliant white light, and then shattered, a chain reaction spreading to the crystals around it, each one exploding in a silent, beautiful puff of light. Thermal shock. Of course. It wasn't about brute force. It was about finding the weakness, the flaw in the perfect design. She scrambled back to the breaker box and examined her suit. The EVA pack had emergency chemical heating charges, designed to prevent the suit's systems from freezing in deep space. It was a long shot, a desperate, insane piece of improvisation. She activated 3 of them, the small packets on her chest and back growing intensely hot. Then she pressed her back against the crystal cocoon, praying the polycarbonate of her suit wouldn't melt. The crystal groaned, a low, resonant sound of protest. A hairline fracture appeared, then another. She could feel the heat seeping through her suit, the skin on her back beginning to blister. She gritted her teeth against the pain, pushing harder. The song in her head was a shriek now, a chorus of agony and rage. The entity knew what she was doing. It was fighting back. The pressure on her suit intensified. The light of the aurora focused on her, a lance of pure energy that threatened to overwhelm the suit's radiation shielding. Her vision swam, the stars blurring into streaks of light. With a final, explosive crack, the crystal cocoon shattered, showering her with glittering dust. The breaker switch was exposed. She lunged for it, her movements clumsy, her body screaming in protest. She pulled the heavy lever down, the sound of the connection, a solid, final thunk that she felt through the soles of her boots more than she heard. The station shuddered beneath her feet, a deep, violent tremor that nearly threw her into the void. A wave of pure, white energy, silent and blinding, erupted from the station's core, a shock wave of raw, chaotic power that blasted outward. The aurora, the beautiful, terrible light of the chime, flickered, wavered, and then, for the first time in months, it went out. The stars returned, cold, sharp, and blessedly silent. The music was gone. Kalen floated, untethered, in a sudden, profound silence that was more shocking than the noise had been. The only sound was the harsh, ragged rasp of her own breathing. She had done it. She had screamed at the hurricane, and for a moment, the hurricane had fallen silent. But as she turned back toward the airlock, she saw the price of that silence. The energy wave had been imprecise. The comm spire she had been clinging to was gone, vaporized. A huge, jagged wound had been torn in the station's dorsal spine, and the airlock, her only way back inside, was a twisted, melted ruin. She was alive. She was victorious. And she was stranded on the outside of her dying station, with 5 minutes of oxygen left in her tanks, watching the last of her hope burn away into the silent, unforgiving dark. The silence was a lie. Kalen had silenced the chime, but in its place was a new sound, the frantic, high-pitched alarm of her own life support system. Oxygen level critical. 280 seconds remaining. The calm, computerized voice was a death sentence delivered with perfect, infuriating politeness. She stared at the mangled airlock, a grotesque metal scar where her salvation should have been. The overload had worked, but the patient had died on the operating table. Or, at least, her part of it had. Despair was a cold, heavy thing, and it threatened to anchor her here, to let her become just another piece of frozen debris in Acheron's Gate's lonely orbit. But the ghost of the Odyssey was still with her. 12 dead. She would not make it 13 by giving up. She kicked off from the ruined spire, a desperate, clumsy push that sent her tumbling through the silent void. Her target was a place no sane person would ever aim for, the main exhaust port for the station's maneuvering thrusters. It was a massive, circular vent, currently dormant, but it led directly back into the engineering decks. It was also designed to channel plasma heated to millions of degrees. If the thrusters were to fire, even for a millisecond, her suit would offer as much protection as tissue paper. It was a choice between a quick death and a slightly less quick one. She drifted. The station a silent, wounded giant rotating slowly beneath her. She could see the refinery sector, a large, cylindrical module on the station's ventral side. The lights were still on. Reese. The survivors. Had her gamble paid off for them, or had the shockwave turned their refuge into a tomb? The thought spurred her on. She had to know. She hit the edge of the thruster port hard, her gloved hand scrambling for a hold on a maintenance rail. The metal was slick with frozen exhaust particles. She hauled herself over the edge and into the cavernous darkness of the port itself. It was a perfect, deep black, a tunnel into the station's guts. She switched on her helmet lights, the beams cutting a feeble swathe through the gloom. The interior of the thruster bell was a maze of coolant pipes and ignition coils. She found what she was looking for: an emergency access hatch, used for manual inspections. It was designed to be opened only from the inside, but engineers, by nature, are paranoid creatures who believe in redundancy and back doors. She knew that behind the main locking mechanism was a simple, manual release cog, a failsafe in case the automated systems were ever compromised, like, for instance, by a massive station-wide energy pulse. She pulled a spanner from her toolkit, the magnetic head locking onto the cog. It was slow, agonizing work. Every turn was a monumental effort in the zero-G, her muscles screaming in protest, her lungs burning with each ragged, oxygen-starved breath. 20 seconds remaining. The final bolt gave way with a silent shudder. The hatch swung inward, revealing the familiar red-lit chaos of a service corridor. Kaylin scrambled through, her helmet scraping against the frame, and slammed her hand against the emergency pressurization button. Air, blessedly real, breathable air, hissed into the small chamber. She ripped off her helmet, gasping, her lungs aching as they filled with the familiar, recycled air of the station, tinged with the scent of ozone and hot metal. She was alive. She was inside, but the station was still dying. The red emergency lights cast everything in a bloody glow. Gravity was intermittent, shifting as the station's internal stabilizers struggled to compensate for the massive structural damage. She stumbled through the corridors, half floating, half running, making her way toward the refinery. The silence was unnerving. The constant hum of the station's life support, the thrum of its machinery, it was all gone. All that remained was the groan of stressed metal and the distant, percussive clang of debris striking the outer hull. She found Reese in the main corridor leading to the refinery sector. He was leaning against a bulkhead, his pulse rifle discarded on the floor, a jagged piece of shrapnel protruding from his shoulder. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. He looked up as she approached, his eyes widening first in disbelief, then in a weary, grim relief. "Knew you were too stubborn to die," he rasped, a weak smile touching his lips. "It worked. The singing, it's gone. You did it." "Kay, Eris?" she asked, kneeling beside him, examining the wound. It was deep. And the survivors. Reese's smile vanished. When the shockwave hit, the power in the refinery blew. Chen, he was a good kid, tried to restore the emergency lights. A power conduit arced. He was gone before he hit the floor. He coughed, a wet, ragged sound. Eris took advantage of the chaos. He and about 50 of the others, the ones who had really started to listen. They sealed themselves in the primary hydroponics bay, said they were going to await the second coming. The rest, they're terrified, leaderless. They wouldn't know which way to point a rescue ship if it landed in their laps. "There are no rescue ships coming," Kaylin said, her voice flat. She had seen the damage to the comms array. They were alone. She found a medical kit on the wall and began to dress Reese's wound. He hissed in pain as she applied a coagulant patch. "We have maybe 12 hours of life support," she said, her mind already working, calculating, running through the endless list of problems. The overload stabilized the fusion core, but it shattered the primary coolant system. It's a slow meltdown now, a matter of when, not if. So, what's the plan? Commander Reese asked, his voice laced with a dark, exhausted humor. The title didn't feel like a blow this time. It felt earned. She had faced the void and survived. She had screamed at the hurricane and won. Now she had to lead the survivors out of the wreckage. "The plan," she said, pulling the bandage tight, "is the ore haulers." Reese stared at her. "The automated freighters. They're just remote-controlled cargo tubs. They don't have life support. No navigation to speak of beyond a simple docking autopilot. But they have reinforced cargo holds designed to carry highly volatile, unrefined ore through asteroid fields," she countered, her mind racing ahead. "They're built like bunkers. We can pressurize the holds, rig up a temporary CO2 scrubber from the refinery's atmospheric processors. We can't steer them, but the last flight plan is still in their logs. A trajectory to the nearest relay station, Argentus. It's a 7-day trip. 7 days in a tin can with 200 scared civilians and a jury-rigged air supply," Reese said, but there was a flicker of something new in his eyes. Not hope. Exactly. Something harder. The grim determination of a survivor. "It's not a plan. It's a prayer. It's all we've got," she said. "Help me up. We need to get the others moving. We'll load the non-essentials, the women, the children, onto the first hauler. You and I will take the second with a skeleton crew and the essential equipment. We leave Eris and his cult to their new gods." But as Reese struggled to his feet, a new alarm began to blare through the corridor. A shrill, insistent pulse that was different from the others. It wasn't a systems failure alarm. It was a proximity alert, a security sensor. One of the few still active on the outer hull had picked something up. Kaylin ran to a nearby terminal, her blood turning to ice. A grainy, low-resolution image appeared on the screen. It was not a rescue ship. It was a vessel of some kind, but it was unlike any design she had ever seen. It was sleek and black, with no visible drive ports, no windows, no lights. It looked less like a machine and more like a shard of frozen night. And it was covered in the same iridescent, crystalline structures that had infested their station. It hadn't come from hyperspace. It had simply appeared. As she watched, a section of its hull seemed to dissolve, and a smaller object detached itself, moving toward the station with a slow, deliberate grace. It was a pod, or a probe, or a passenger. Reese limped to her side, his hand gripping the fresh bandage on his shoulder. "What is it?" he breathed. Kaylin zoomed in on the image, the resolution degrading into a mess of pixels, but she could make out a shape. A single, humanoid figure encased in a shimmering, crystalline shell, standing motionless on the approaching vessel. The chime was gone. The song was over, but the choir had just sent its conductor to meet them. And from the hydroponics bay, a new sound began to echo through the dead station, the sound of 50 people. Their voices joined in a soft, melodic, welcoming hum. Eris and his followers had found their salvation after all, and it was coming to claim the rest of them. The proximity alert was a shriek that cut through the station's dying groans, a mechanical scream that said, "The monster is at the door." Kaylin didn't hesitate. There was no time for the cold dread that was trying to pool in her stomach. She grabbed Reese's good arm, hauling him away from the terminal. "Go," she commanded, her voice hard, brittle. "Get to the docking bay. Start the evacuation. Load the first hauler. Get it launched. No arguments. No delays. I don't care if they have to leave with the clothes on their backs. Get them moving." Reese stared at her, then at the image of the crystalline figure on the screen. His face a mask of grim understanding. "And you, I'm going to buy you time," she said. "I shouted at their symphony. Now I need to have a word with the conductor." He gave a single, sharp nod, grabbing his discarded pulse rifle. "Don't get yourself killed, Commander." "That's an order." He turned and limped down the corridor, his heavy footsteps echoing a rhythm of grim purpose. Kaylin ran in the opposite direction, back toward the wounded heart of the station's central engineering. The survivors were Reese's problem now. Her problem was the beautiful, the silent god that had come to collect its congregation. She moved through the gravity-warped corridors, her mag boots kicking in and out as the artificial fields fluctuated. The station was a dying animal, and she was a flea crawling on its back, trying to reason with the coming storm. The humming from the hydroponics bay was growing louder, a sound of zealous, ecstatic welcome that grated on her nerves. Eris was rolling out the red carpet, and she was preparing for a war. She burst back into the engineering hub, the crystalline statues of her former crewmates seeming to watch her with their silent, glittering eyes. The master status board was a waterfall of red alerts, but a few subsystems were still green. She needed a voice, a way to speak to the entity, not with words, but with physics. Her overload trick had been a primal scream of chaos. This time, she needed to be precise. She couldn't outsing the entity, but maybe she could poison the song. She began to work, her hands flying over the console, her mind a maelstrom of desperate calculations. She bypassed the fried comms array and began routing power to the station's network of seismic sensors, the devices designed to monitor structural integrity. She linked them to the life support systems, to the readouts from the slowly melting core, to the biomonitors in the med bay. She was building an instrument not of music, but of pain, a system that would broadcast not a coherent frequency, but the raw, chaotic, dissonant data of a dying station and its terrified inhabitants. It was the antithesis of the chime's perfect harmony. It was a broadcast of pure, unfiltered entropy, a signal that said, "We are broken, we are flawed, we are dying. You cannot tune this instrument. It will only shatter in your hands." At the docking bay, chaos reigned. Reese, leaning heavily against a cargo container, roared orders over the panicked chatter of 200 civilians. They were pushing, shoving, their fear a palpable stench in the recycled air. The first ore hauler, a huge, ugly box of a ship, was docked, its cavernous hold open like a hungry mouth. "One bag per person move," Reese bellowed, his voice raw. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the din, the melodic, harmonious humming of Eris's followers. They emerged from a service corridor, 50 strong, their faces rapturous, their eyes unfocused. Eris was at their head, his expression one of beatific calm. "Brothers, sisters," he called out, his voice resonating with an unnerving calm. "Do not board these tombs of metal. Salvation has arrived. Do you not hear it? They have come to complete the great work To harmonize us with the cosmos, they spread out, forming a human chain, blocking the ramp to the hauler. They didn't have weapons. They didn't need them. Their certainty was a wall. A young officer, one of the few security personnel left, drew his sidearm. "Get out of the way," he yelled, his voice cracking. Aris simply smiled. "There is no need for violence. We are all on the same path now." Just then, a deep, resonant thud echoed through the entire station. The lights flickered violently. A section of the ceiling in the docking bay buckled, showering sparks down on the terrified crowd. The crystalline conductor had arrived. It didn't use a door. It simply stepped through the station's hull as if it were passing through a curtain of smoke, the metal and plasteel parting before it and resealing behind it, leaving a shimmering, crystalline scar. It stood 20 feet tall, a slender, elegant figure of living, shifting crystal, light refracting through its form in 1,000 dazzling colors. It had no face, no features, but Kalen, watching on a security feed in engineering, felt an ancient, overwhelming intelligence radiating from it. The crowd screamed. Reese leveled his rifle, but he didn't fire. What was the point? Aris fell to his knees, his arms outstretched. "It is here," he whispered, tears of joy streaming down his face. "Glorious!" The conductor took a step, its crystalline feet making no sound on the deck plates. It moved toward the sound of its followers, toward Eris. It extended a long, slender hand, a limb of pure, sculpted light. Eris crawled forward, reaching for that hand as a drowning man reaches for a rope. "Make me whole," he wept. "Let me join the song." In engineering, Kalen slammed her fist down on the console. "Now," she snarled. She engaged the broadcast. From every functioning speaker, every terminal, every vibrating plate in the station, her signal of pain erupted. It was a horrific, grating cacophony, the scream of tearing metal, the arrhythmic beat of 200 panicked hearts, the rising shriek of the unstable core, the flatline of a failing life support system. It was the sound of death, amplified and weaponized. The conductor froze. The beautiful light within its form flickered, shifting to a discordant, ugly red. It was as if her broadcast was causing it physical pain. It retracted its hand from Eris, who let out a cry of despair. The entity turned its faceless head, a gesture of pure confusion, as if trying to locate the source of this sudden, agonizing blasphemy. But it was too late for Eris. A single, shimmering shard of its being had already touched him. He began to glow, his body convulsing, but he wasn't transforming into a beautiful, perfect crystal. He was shattering, his skin cracked, light pouring from the fissures, his bones resonating at an impossible frequency. His scream was not one of transcendence, but of agonizing, absolute dissolution. He exploded in a silent, brilliant flash of light and a shower of fine, gray dust. His followers stared, their humming cut short, their faith vaporized in an instant. The conductor, reeling from Kalen's psychic assault, seemed to look through the terrified humans, its mission corrupted. It had come seeking a choir and had found a madhouse, with a final, sorrowful pulse of dull, gray light. It turned and stepped back through the hull, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Outside, its dark ship dissolved into the void, leaving only silence. The spell was broken. Reese fired his rifle into the ceiling. "Go," he roared. The stunned civilians, shocked back to reality by the horrific death of Oris and the departure of the alien, surged up the ramp. The remnants of the cult, their faces blank with shock, simply stumbled aside, their purpose gone. Kalen watched the first hauler undock, its thrusters firing a clumsy, desperate farewell. She rerouted the last of the station's power to the second docking clamp, her ship. She ran, stumbling through the now darkening corridors as the station gave its final, shuddering groans. She made it to the bay just as Reese was herding the last of the security team aboard. He grabbed her hand and pulled her up the ramp. "A little close, don't you think?" he grunted. The ramp sealed behind them. Through the thick port window, Kalen watched Acheron's gate die. The fusion core finally breached containment. A silent, brilliant flower of blue-white plasma blooming from its heart. The station broke apart, a slow, graceful, and utterly final ballet of destruction. She stood on the makeshift bridge of the ore hauler, a cramped metal box that smelled of sweat and fear. Around her were the last 100 survivors of Acheron's gate. They were battered, broken, and adrift in a universe that was infinitely more terrifying than they had ever imagined. The ghost of the Odyssey was finally quiet. She hadn't been perfect. She hadn't saved everyone, but she had saved enough. She looked out at the starfield ahead, at the long, girded dark road to Argentus. They were a shipload of ghosts running from a silent song at the edge of the void, and she was their commander.